first of all, it's important to understand the difference between privacy and security. So oftentimes organizations think if they have world-class security, that they've met all their privacy obligations. Security is extremely important, but security is the fortress that protects that personal data from unauthorized access and use. So companies in New Zealand need to understand that fundamental difference, that you can have the best security and still not have addressed your privacy obligations. So organizations here need to step back and first look at what does their privacy program look like? What is the foundation for which they build their privacy practices? What do their policies look like? What do their procedures look like? What personal data are they collecting on employees, on contractors, on suppliers, on partners, on customers? Why are they collecting that data? What are they using that data for? Do they have a legal and valid reason for collecting that data? How transparent are they about the collection and use of that data? And once they've built that privacy foundation and are legally allowed to collect and process that data, then they need to look at security, whether it's encrypting the data, whether it's having, using tokenization and keeping the key and locking that data down from unauthorized access and use. But the most important part is starting with whether or not you're legally allowed to have that data. The influence and the introduction of cloud has definitely impacted the need to pay attention to privacy laws and the importance of privacy. The virtual nature of the cloud is that the data can be anywhere. Even though you may identify one location for your data center, the data can be replicated and backed up in various jurisdictions. It can flow through different jurisdictions in order to get to wherever the data center is. And so the need to ensure that we understand where our data is, where it's collected, where it flows through, what jurisdiction it crosses through, where it's backed up and where it's replicated is extremely important. That doesn't mean that the cloud is a bad direction by any means. It just means you have to do your privacy due diligence and making sure you're addressing more than just security. You're actually addressing the privacy component. We definitely, with the introduction of the cloud, are going to have to look at some new data governance strategies. And it's around, companies have traditionally focused on security, understanding the fortress that protects that data from unauthorized access and use. And unfortunately, a lot of times when companies are making decisions to move to the cloud or to outsource to a third party, they focus strictly on the security aspect. And because of the virtual nature of the cloud, it's extremely important that organizations focus on the privacy compliance component first and foremost. Do you have the legal right to collect that data? Do you have the legal right to put that data into a cloud environment? Does your cloud provider comply with the applicable data privacy laws? Once you've addressed those issues, then you need to look at the security and protecting that data from unauthorized access and use. But the privacy due diligence has to be done first, and that's a totally different model. So if the U.S. government were to come in and to ask for access to your data, first of all, they do have to have a valid and legitimate legal reason to request the data, whether it's under a court order, whether they have a subpoena to access the data. They can't just come in and say, turn the data over. There's no legal requirement to do that. But if there is an investigation going on and they do have a subpoena where it's been approved by the court, and the U.S.-based company gets the subpoena, they do have to turn the data over. The first reaction should always be to push back and to push the government to the customer. Because if the cloud provider is storing data on behalf of their customers, they don't own that data. That data belongs to the customer. And so the first initial reaction should always be push back to the customer and say, if you want the data, you need to go back to the data owner. That's the customer. However, there are certain situations where the government's not going to accept that. If the subpoena is going to you, you're going to have to look at, is it relevant? Do we have a legal obligation to do it? Do we have to comply with this? If we don't comply, are we going to be in contempt of court? So there's different considerations you have to take, you have to look at. Certainly you need to engage your legal team, but there are going to be certain circumstances where if you get a legal order, you're going to have to comply with it. Any organization anywhere in the world that has access to the personal data of an EU resident, whether they provide goods and services to an EU resident, whether they monitor the behavior of an EU resident, whether they have a website that EU residents go to and actually provide personal data, those organizations, even if they have no presence in the EU are going to have to comply with the new regulation. It's a massive overhaul. So between now and 2018, companies are going to be thoroughly engaged in trying to build a privacy framework, make sure they have the right policies and procedures and processes in place, make sure they're able to comply with the GDPR. Social media is certainly one of the areas where the protection of personal data has been probably the least protected. People want to post something on Instagram, or they want to put something on Facebook. They don't realize that they are voluntarily doing that, but they haven't asked the additional questions of, what is the company doing with my data once it's up there? Is it being shared with people that are not within my circle? Is that data really private? Can that data ever be destroyed, or is it there forever? I may give up my privacy for one particular reason, but I didn't give up my privacy so that you could then go and sell my data to 14 companies to then start marketing to me. So the best way to be able to protect your personal information is to be aware and to ask questions, to know when someone asks you for certain information, you have every right to push back and say, why do you need that data? What are you going to do with it? Where is it going to be stored? How long are you going to maintain it? If you're not comfortable, don't give up your data.